Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode one of
Woo!
Macabre Meeting with Craig and Sean, where we
Yeah.
will discuss all things in the horror genre movies. I hope I said horror okay and
Well,
not with Southern mushmouth.
I say it's going to be as close as either one of us can manage to say horror, because
There you go.
it's going to come up a lot in this series.
It will. I am Craig Lance, and my partner in crime over there is.
That is Sean Bearded Kappa
There you
Productions
go.
Linton.
Bearded Kappa Productions.
I don't know why I had a productions. I never say productions on the podcast, but I just said it now on our podcast, so that won't be a regular thing. But we're going to keep rolling anyway.
There you go. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. A little background on Sean and I. We've been friends for what, about 7 years now?
Got to be
Uh,
around that, yeah.
yeah, we have a lot of common interest, and one of the things we both share a passion for is horror movies.
Yes.
So both of us being veterans of the podcast arena thought, why don't we get together and talk about these movies that bring out this passion in us?
Oh, for sure.
So, yeah. So, Sean, I thought maybe you could start by telling everyone, kind of where you fell in love with this genre of movies.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, my love of horror movies started with being told I'm not allowed to watch them growing up. Very,
That'll do it for most kids.
oh, absolutely. Very strict upbringing, good Christian family, and for just looking out for my soul and all that goodness. So yeah, couldn't watch, these horror movies, these scary movies were very were not allowed.
Right.
Definitely not allowed in the home. And through going to sleepovers with friends, yeah, I stumbled upon actually a very specific franchise. And they say
Yeah.
you always love your first. And we watched my to my best of my knowledge, and I'm probably going to say the wrong one, but I'm pretty sure it was Friday the 13th Part 6
Okay.
was the my first real horror movie I truly remember seeing, and hence became
Wow.
my obsession with the franchise. And
Wow.
but yeah, that one, and like that's what got me interested. And then of course it's over the years once I got out on my own, it just it's always been like I don't know, it's always appealed. Horror movies have always appealed with the tension, admittedly a little bit of the violence, admittedly a little bit of the nudity. All these like all the campy fun of watching dumb teenagers get slaughtered. It's just always entertained me endlessly. I can't help it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in fair, because, usually in these movies, the kids do stupid stuff that, lead to their own slaughter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So for me, I want to say I was about 6 years old, maybe seven. Um, and I'm old enough to remember when there was only four channels on TV. So, you only had a random selection of channels. So, my family was in the carnival business, and it meant that we often got back to our hotel late at night.
Right.
We'd work all day. The show would close at midnight. We'd get home, and sometimes the channels are off by the time you get back to because back then they turned off the channels at 1 or 2 in the morning.
Oh yeah, even like I was at the tail end. I think of that growing up as a kid. I remember the national anthem playing and then just static.
Yeah, yeah, and so we got back to the room one night and there was nothing on TV except for this little black and white movie
Mm.
called Night of the Living Dead.
Oh wow, that's a good introduction.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was like, I want to say like maybe 6, somewhere in that range.
Right.
But there was nothing on. My mom got on the phone, and was talking on the phone, and I think she expected me to fall asleep because it was late. And I laid there watching this movie with just wild-eyed wonderment as these ghouls surrounded the house and gnawing on dead rats and all of
Oh
this
yeah.
stuff going on. And I was addicted at that point. Not that my parents were ever super conservative about what they let me watch. Um, where yours was more conservative. I mean, my mom took me to horror movies all the time. So,
Right, right. And I know like my upbringing was definitely. I mean, I'm not gonna say unnormal. or not a normal upbringing, because I had a lot of friends like that too. But like you said, my wife, she was taken as a child to many not just necessarily horror, but just R-rated movies all the time. So like she saw a
Yeah.
lot when she was growing up as well. So I'm just unique like that, I guess, in this case.
I, I, I would say you're probably less unique. I would say that
Right.
probably your wife and I are probably in the more unique case than
True.
what you would
True.
think, um, especially when it comes to slasher type movies and ghost
Oh,
movies and these things that, I think people try to shelter their kids a little bit from them.
right. Right.
But, either way, that's where my love developed was early age, and then my mom took me to movies all the time. We'd go to I remember going and seeing Poltergeist with her at the
Uh,
theater, and
Classic.
yeah. So
No, very
yeah,
cool. Very
so
cool.
so what we thought we would do is we would pick a series to start our podcast with, and we would just go through it episode by episode. We would go through each movie in that series.
Right.
And with Friday the 13th being your big passion in this genre,
Oh,
and it
absolutely.
certainly is one of mine, not to the level of yours, but it is one of them that's up there on mine. We thought we'd start with this series.
Oh yeah, gotta kick it off right.
There you go. So, first thing first, we can't talk about these movies without spoiling them, people. So, if you
Yeah.
haven't seen this movie, go watch it and come back and listen.
Yes, go watch a movie from 1980.
Yes, because
Now,
we are going to spoil it
because
for, the two or three people that haven't seen this movie and happen to find their way to our podcast.
yeah, I got it. But you know what? It's possible. It's not just the podcast, but people who not have seen this movie. I'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, it's amazing how some people don't know about some of these movies that we're going to be talking about through the course of this series.
Yeah, and some movies hit people's zeitgeist, and some are just part of the cultural zeitgeist, and maybe you hear about it, but you've never seen it.
Right.
So, we don't want to spoil the movie for you. So if you, and we're not only going to talk about older movies as new movies come out, we're going to jump in. Let's say if next week a badass horror movie came out, we wanted to talk about it, we would just insert it in here and then get back on our deal.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we don't want to spoil anything. So I'll try and give you a spoiler warning every week on when you should stop and then come back.
Yeah, so make sure you
But
come back.
yeah, definitely come back after you watch the movie. So first up is Friday the 13th. And I believe both of us watched the uncut version,
Yes.
which we'll get to that later. This movie runs about an hour and 35 minutes long. It was released in 1980, directed by Sean S. Cunningham, written by Victor Miller and Ron Kurz. It stars Betsy Palmer as Mrs. Voorhees, Adrian King as Alice, and a very young Kevin Bacon in one of his earliest roles as Jack, where he wears pretty much a Speedo through half of the movie. So
And we're all grateful for that.
basically, this movie is about a summer camp called Camp Crystal Lake that has a horrific history. In 1957, a boy named Jason Voorhees drowned at the camp. His mother, who worked at the camp at the time as a cook, blamed the camp counselors who, as she put it, were too busy, quote unquote, making love and not paying attention to her son and the other campers.
Yep.
The following year, 1958, with the camp still open, a pair of counselors sneak off to mess around, where they are soon stabbed to death. Fast forward to modern day, which basically means the late 70s or 80s, and the camp is getting ready to open for the first time since 1958. The counselors have arrived 2 weeks prior to opening to put the finishing touches on the camp. As it turns out, Camp Blood, as it is nicknamed, lives up to its reputation as slowly but surely everyone gets picked off by our killer.
Oh
Okay,
yeah.
so that's basically the story. Um, Sean, why don't you tell us your thoughts to get started on this?
Well, I mean, like, while granted, this movie is openly inspired by a lot of some of its predecessors. Like Halloween is admittedly from the creators a big inspiration for this film, as well as I believe Last House on the Left has been kind of quoted, but they also added in. They admitted to like teenage comedies like Meatballs
Yeah, I can
being
see that.
influenced with the teenagers in here. But this one really solidified the camp killing, which is, I mean, obviously that's Friday the 13th's bread and butter, but there's been other similar movies since. So I mean, this movie
There,
was like, oh sorry.
I was going to say there's been a lot of movies that have mimicked that since or paid, homage to it. To
Oh yeah,
it.
oh absolutely. But I mean, this movie was a theatrical powerhouse when it dropped. I saw that it was made for like around 500,000. It made 39 million in its run.
Dang, man.
Like that's a hell of a profit. And this was pretty much like an independent. I have the Tales from Camp Crystal Lake book that kind of like goes through the history of the entire film franchise, and
Yeah.
like this film took like, I mean, it was all like basically luck and just people like, okay, this you can make it cheap. We'll make as long as we get our money back. We don't care. So no one was prepared for this movie to be a powerhouse. That it ended up being. So like yeah, and like when you look at it, it's very not gonna say. I mean, it is low budget, but you can see there's like talent behind there. One of the big talents too for this movie is actually Tom Savini. If y'all know that name, he's big in the horror
Yeah.
movies for the special effects. This was one of his early films.
Yeah.
So,
Tom Savini from Night of the Living Dead.
yep, which I believe that's his
Same.
first one.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, they were fans of his work. I believe that film, or maybe another one he had done, and I mean, he was like the first thing they're like, we have to get him for this film. So that's
So Tom did the special effects on this.
yes, he did.
Oh, that's nice. I did not know that.
Oh yeah,
See,
I
I
mean,
learn something every day.
right, and that's I mean, that's why like even for as minimal of a budget, he's so passionate about it. Like, I mean, the effects, if nothing else, the kills are amazing, and if for me who does appreciate like the art of making a kill look realistic, especially back in these days before CG blood was a thing. you know, everything
Right.
everything had to be done practically.
Right.
And this man being a Vietnam War photographer, he knows what wounds look like. So like
Yeah.
that was a big part of his skill. So when I first
Well,
saw, oh sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was
Finish
gonna
your thought.
say because this is not my first Friday the 13th, but it is like it's hard for me to because I love the franchise. I don't really pick favorites. To me, it's all one long story, which I'll get into also about my own headcanon for some of these as we go through them.
Yeah.
But this one is just it's effective in its simplicity. Like a lot the campers
I
die.
agree with that, man.
Oh,
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
because a lot of the campers, like the dialogue, I mean, there was a script and it was still tightly written to the script, but there are moments throughout that you could tell are just kind of like, hey, just go out there and talk like kids talk. You know what I mean? Like let the campers feel very natural. A lot of these kids, like Kevin Bacon, I'm pretty sure this is his first movie, and like it was a lot of
Yeah, I
their
think
first.
all of his other parts were kind of bit parts before this.
Right, right, and he had yeah, so and he got he had a pretty prominent role, and like we'll get into it later. Something we discussed, but like he's involved in something I'm going to bring up a little bit later after we kind of talk both
Okay.
our thoughts on it.
Well,
So yeah, huh?
one thing I wanted to throw in there real quick
Yeah,
before you continue on is you talked about some of the other influences, but one thing I noticed watching this episode, I'll call it, in the
right,
series
yeah.
is how much of a psycho vibe it had.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
I don't know that I'd noticed that before.
oh really? Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah.
100%. Because Psycho, I believe, was at least in the horror genre, was like the first use of first person perspective
Yeah.
in the shower scene, which
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they only did it in that one, and maybe right before they revealed who was the killer in Psycho. They use it a
Yeah.
ton in this film and use it effectively,
Yeah.
which I think was also part of the effectiveness of feeling for these campers because there are times where they're talking right to you.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, so that's going to get me to something else here, but
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
the Psycho vibe for me. It's when his mom is kind of going back and forth between him, but she's talking as Jason and as
Oh yeah,
herself.
right,
And
right.
to me, that is so reminiscent of the end of Psycho, where he's, basically slipped into the mother persona
Right.
and won't come out of it. So it's very similar to that. And I don't know how I didn't catch that before, but in my rewatch of it for this show, I was like, damn.
Well,
But
yeah, and that's the beauty of rewatching, especially like when we're doing it now for a show like us, where we've both watched this movie, I'm sure, many, many times in our lives, but it's a little different when you
yeah,
watch something analytically, which I'm guilty of
I
not being able
agree.
to
I
turn that
agree.
off at times. But yeah, so this movie, like, yeah, when I first saw it, I saw why there was, by the time I discovered the franchise, already 5 sequels. So yeah, it's absolutely a fantastic film. But what about you? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
There's that. There's I was surprised by how effective the little amount of gore that it had was,
Right.
because you think of Friday the 13th and you think gore. It's going to be blood there's very little gore in this movie.
Yeah.
That's
And
not to say there's not blood.
oh yeah, there are. There's definitely blood. But
There's one shot particular where she gets an axe to her head,
yeah.
and that's really the only gory shot in the movie.
Well,
In my,
there's that one and the Kevin Bacon one, which what I know we were gonna do, and it's already been brought up, so I'm gonna go ahead and say it now.
yeah,
We kind of we discussed we were gonna maybe give our favorite kills of a movie,
yeah, best kill, yeah.
and I'm gonna go ahead and say it, and I wouldn't be surprised if you agree with it too. Is Kevin Bacon getting an arrow through his trachea up from
That that was my first choice.
yeah.
I changed it right
Oh,
at the last minute,
right.
and I went with the decapitation of Mrs. Voorhees.
That's a damn good one, and it's even
Because even though it's not the killer's kill,
right.
it's still the kill.
No, and
So
it's an iconic one, and it's a damn good choice. And I just think the Kevin Bacon one also though is like the way they did that with the fake, no, the fake tour. Like again, I'm a huge nerd. I'm gonna ramble a
yeah,
lot in this franchise. I apologize
no,
to the
go for it.
fans.
That's what we're here for.
Like just seeing, like I've seen the behind the scenes of how they had to rig up an entire fake torso with Kevin Bacon, like basically having to prop his head up like he's on a recliner there for the fake body, and like the arrow puncturing through, and it's like it's a real sharp arrow that Savini himself is pushing. That's actually his hand that grabs Kevin Bacon's forehead uh,
Really? Okay.
in that scene, and it's pushing the arrow up, and like he could have, like, if Bacon lowered his head too much, he could have actually gotten, like, at least sliced by the edge of it, because it was all practical effects on that. And I was watching this. I was watching the uncut version, though. We both did because I had your copy of it. And I'm watching. I'm like, have I always had the uncut version? Because I'm not seeing anything new. And then I
I
remember,
did. Go ahead, because I didn't see anything new. So that I was going to ask you what you noticed.
and this is what I noticed. And it happened in the axe to the face scene.
Okay.
And from reading the book, about the making of this movie, most of the cuts were only seconds here and there of the gore to get it an R rating. It's like they're
Gotcha.
shaving down. So we had longer. There were just longer takes on the murders. We had a few more seconds. That's really all they ever cut
Gotcha.
out of the film in the first place. So like, like you never saw the axe going into her face, but like
Right.
that moment where she slides down, and they kind of hold on it for a second. Like in the
Yeah.
original cut, I'm fairly certain that it's just a shorter pan to her. So really, like, the uncut version is really just more gore, but only like
More
seconds
gore.
at a time.
Yeah, and it's still fairly mild.
But it was
You
so
know,
shocking
it.
back then. It actually, which we'll get to when we get into the part two, when we record that. Actually, as good as it did, as much as they shaved off to get the R rating, the studios were still very unhappy with how violent it was.
Really? Okay. Well, yeah, I can't wait to hear that. Uh, Again, something that surprised me was the low amount of nudity.
Yeah, yeah,
You really don't have much in it. which I don't know why. In my mind, I always think of Friday the 13th movies with a lot of nudity.
Well,
But
yeah, because that got amped up a little bit in the
as
more in the sequels.
yeah, yeah,
Because
but
this
it
one
was like
had,
a
yeah, I think we had like what, just a brief sequence right before Kevin Bacon goes.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
You know,
and
lots of underwear shots and stuff like that. But yeah, not that I watched the movies for that, but it was just kind of a shock to me
yeah.
that there was just as little as there was, I guess.
Well, I mean, when whether you enjoy it or not, or no one watches it for it, but it's, it's a bonus.
It is a
If you
bonus.
enjoy it, you got, like you said, you do get the occasional bare breast in these movies, and for others who want the other thing, you get Kevin Bacon in a speedo. So there's something for everybody in these
There you
films.
go.
But yeah, I mean, because like, but even in 1980 when this came out, like even that much with the gore and that, they called it like, they called it trash. This movie got destroyed by critics.
Well,
Like,
of course it did.
yeah, like Siskel and Ebert like named this like the worst movie they'd ever seen, accused it of being misogynistic, and all which only helped the box office sales, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, there are some things that happen in it that you couldn't do in today when you're talking about misogynism.
Oh, of course, of course.
Yeah, you couldn't have the owner of the camp. Yeah, he was borderline about to get sued for sexual harassment.
Right. Oh, oh,
And
for
then
sure.
the kid dancing around in the Native American headdress, that
Yeah.
probably wouldn't play today, but it's a product of its time, and I don't look down on those things for the time for which they were made.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you acknowledge that it's no longer acceptable, but like, depending on within the context. This isn't, like a movie, like say blackface. Even though, yeah, him dancing around with Native American garb, not acceptable, not cool. But
Yeah,
for
but he was playing. I mean,
yeah,
it was
exactly.
in yeah, and probably high at the time.
Oh, most
Which
definitely high.
yeah,
Sex, drug, and rock and roll, and that's why they get theirs in all horror movies. Either the creators say that whole the whole like, you have sex, you die, do drugs, you're gonna die, like that whole moral thing, purely
yeah,
coincidental. They're just showing what teenagers do. So
yeah,
it's not
yeah.
it's not moral high ground, quote unquote, killings that go on in these horror movies. At least not in the Friday the 13th films. It said it was never the
No,
intention, but they understood why people kind of made that connection, because that is typically what happens, with an exception. But that's actually for a later movie we'll discuss,
yeah.
where doing what you're supposed not to do actually saved a character's life.
Oh yeah,
But no, yeah, this movie is just it's so important to me. While it did, kind of like get his laurels on the coattails of some like of Halloween, which was, a monster hit and a monster influence on horror movies for decades to come, this one included. But it also, like, Jason, no, well, not Jason, which isn't even Jason in this film, but the Friday the
that's right.
13th the franchise, has just been so important and influential to the horror genre itself that
Oh yeah, you can't deny the importance that it's played in this genre.
right.
You just can't. And yes, it borrowed from previous things like we talked about, but everything borrows from previous things.
Oh, absolutely. And well, I guess we did already say it without warning the spoilers, but now we're going to really get into the ending, because it's something I want to
Yeah.
discuss. So, spoilers. Stop now if you are like my buddy Leland, who I showed this
We've
movie
already
to.
given the spoiler
Yeah. All right.
warning.
Well, that's true. We screwed it up. Oh well, fuck it. We're doing it live.
That's right.
Yeah, but like I did want to mention, like, yeah, our buddy Leland. Shout out to Leland Gleason if he's happened to listen. He had never watched horror movies very much, so I showed him this whole series, and he watched Friday the 13th Part One, and this is like 2-3 years ago for the first
Yeah.
time, and did not know the twist of it being Mrs. Voorhees instead of Jason. Like, he knew who Jason was, but like
Yeah.
he legit like, what?
That to me would be the equivalent of making it to Star Wars and not knowing in Empire Strikes Back that Vader is Luke's father.
I would
I mean, it's
guarantee.
that level of twist,
No,
you know.
no, absolutely, and I would guarantee Leland probably still didn't know that until his 20s. We
So
love our buddy, but yeah, yeah,
but that's one of the reasons they did a lot of it from the killer's viewpoint is because they were trying to hide who the killer was
Oh,
through a
absolutely.
good portion of it. You know, they didn't want you to know who the killer was. And like you said, it sometimes the people are even talking to the camera
Right. And you don't
because
know.
they recognize this person or whatever.
Or like,
And yeah, go
oh, sorry,
ahead.
sorry. I was gonna say yeah because like, and that's kind of where they now that you know you can look back, like how calm they were, and
Yes.
especially of the era. It really makes sense why it's a woman because like some of the strangers like, oh hi, yeah, okay, you're going like
Yeah.
I'll jump in your car, you know what I mean, like because like she offed the hook that way.
Right.
And
Early in the movie even.
yeah, but and then we had like, of course, like the big reveal, of it being of her like, oh, I'm Mrs. Voorhees, and she's just so calm and nice, and just that slow, tense build up into her insanity, telling the story of Jason, how she used to work there, and just like oh her son dying, and then just you slowly see like just her unravel, and then like you had mentioned earlier, her talking, as Jason. Like just get her, mommy.
Yeah.
For someone who said the script was absolute shit and threw it away when she first got it, Bessie Palmer fucking killed it in this
Did
role.
she really? Huh?
Oh yeah,
She thought the script was bad, huh?
yeah. Oh no, the first time she read it, yeah, completely threw it away. But then the producer kind of contacted her again because she was like she had done some movies and maybe a little TV. She was actually a bigger stage actress, known
Oh,
for
okay.
kind of motherly roles, and that's exact. They just knew she would absolutely kill it, and she literally agreed to do the movie because she wanted to buy a new car. She honestly thought it was going to be a throwaway movie that she would never hear about again.
Well, little
It's
did she know at the time that this would be a movie that would almost make her a household name.
oh yeah, it's arguably the movie that she's probably best known for. Now
Oh
because
yeah,
like
it's definitely the movie she's best known for, I
and,
would say.
and all accounts say like since like she does conventions, or she did, I believe she did pass away already, but like when she's been quoted making jokes, admittedly like yeah I didn't think it was gonna be anything, but now it's my most well known film, and I still don't know who this guy with the hockey mask is. My son died when he was a kid.
Which brings me to the next part of this. I think it's well understood, and it's actually even shown in the at the end of this movie that the scene at the end where Alice is taken under in the canoe
Right,
by a young Jason is a dream.
right,
So, for everything to line up, he's got to be a grown man by this point, just based on time and all of that playing out and what the second episode or the second movie plays into.
yeah.
So, based on that, do you feel like Jason was helping his mom through this movie?
Uh, wow. You know what? I actually didn't think about that part. Because
I had that thought today when I was watching it. Uh, I'm watching. I'm going. There's some things this little old woman, not little, certainly
right,
wasn't old at the time, but this little woman couldn't really. Yet she struggles at the end to fight Alice, right?
right,
And I'm thinking, well, maybe there's some other parts here. Alice is running through the woods, and I forget which one, but one of the bodies drops in front of her from the tree.
right, right.
It's like perfect timing. Was Jason up there and dropped it to stop her? That sort of thing.
Oh yeah, I can actually see that
Yeah,
because it's been a that man that makes a lot of sense. That actually adds on. Since we're bringing it up now, I know because like yeah, for those who everyone knows this franchise is Jason, so I guess that's no need to really save it for part two where he actually shows up. But there's actually a big thing in the fandom about like that I've talked to a little bit. I avoid fan groups, as you know very well
yeah,
why.
right.
But
Because
because
yeah, they're evil.
right, basically. Except our fan groups. Y'all are great. We love you. But it's always been kind of the thing was like, he drowned as a child, but but why is he a grown man? Or if he was in the lake, because she even gives like, well, he's still down there at the
Yeah,
end. It's like, well, you got to understand, you got the story in this film at least. because this is the first time we hear it, and that'll kind of change, which we'll get into in the sequels. The story of Jace's death is from a crazy fucking woman. You know what I
That's
mean?
right.
So like the details aren't there, and I kind of always like in my mind, and it's still, but that still plays into your idea of like, because I still believe she's killing because she believes her child drowned, and it's like she just doesn't
Oh, there's no
see
doubt
him.
she believes that.
Yeah,
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not there.
yeah, and but him actually helping her kill, which actually, in whether it's intentional or not, and I can't honestly say because they've never actually brought that up. But that's a really good like kind of fill in because as I mentioned, there's times where you see the killer's hands, and it's clear. Like I said, Tom Savini's the one that grabbed Kevin Bacon's
Right.
head when he put the arrow through his neck, and others. There's some other scenes where it's clearly a man's hand, and that would actually make sense that Jason is still doing the killings, except I would say like when like they're kind of like talking to the camera like comfortably because
Yeah.
like Jason is deformed, so we know it ain't him in his as we'll see in part two his potato sack. So as those kills are definitely from Mrs. Voorhees, but maybe the other ones
And
are
I'm
like
not even
yeah,
saying she didn't kill them all, but quite possibly
no
maybe
yeah
a
that
couple of them or just some help
no that
keeping
totally makes
people
sense.
in. Yeah.
No,
You know,
absolutely. I never
it,
thought about that because I was just in my head, in my own canon, it's always been like he's there, like probably helping feed her, like maybe, they're living together, but like she just almost doesn't acknowledge him all the time or forgets he exists. Thinks goes back to thinking he's dead.
well, I don't even know that they're living together because of what happens in part two, which we'll get to in part two.
True, true, right. Well, and again, yeah, we'll definitely get more into that when we get to it, because
Yeah,
but for
but
this one, like yeah, like Mrs. Voorhees, which is it, like I know she's credited as Mrs. Voorhees, but I want to say it's Deborah Voorhees.
I
I
thought it
could
was
be
Pamela, but
Pamela.
what the
No,
hell
you're
do
right.
I know?
You're right. No, you're right. Pamela Voorhees. But like in IMDb, when I was trying to look it up, I was like, "What is her first name?" And I saw IMDb, I just stuck with it. It was Mrs. Voorhees. But yeah, Pamela Voorhees. You're absolutely correct.
Well, even in the credits of the movie, it just says Mrs. Voorhees because
Right.
she never gives her first name. But
Yeah.
I believe that they retconned it to Pamela at some
I
point.
think, yeah, because I think later in the series they kind of acknowledge his mother more, and
Yeah,
I believe they do give her name as Pamela, but but yeah, but going to that, like just like you said, while there's some moments, like you said, dropping bodies timed perfectly and other little things here and there that this tiny woman, but like that didn't stop, like I said, Betsy Palmer from just being vicious. That final fight, like on the shore of the lake with Alice, like
yeah.
they said it like they were black and blue bruised after filming that scene because like Betsy's like, well, in the stage there's no camera angle, so I'm gonna hit you. And just go with it, and I'm sorry, kind of
What
thing.
it worked.
Oh,
I'll say
absolutely.
that because it's a badass fight scene.
Oh yeah, with and Adrian King,
Yeah,
Adriana, however
that's
you say it, Adrian or
yeah,
Adriana, I'm not sure. But yeah, King as Alice, like yeah, no, she it was also a very good lead. The atypical, granted, the surviving girl in most horror movies, and like she played a very good, just like just kind of, she didn't stand out. She wasn't like you wouldn't have been surprised that she was one of the ones to go, even though she didn't fall into any of the tropes of any like them having sex or drugs and all that kind of stuff. But like just like it was a good like I think she did very well from going from that kind of like, which I think is kind of the more effective when you don't see them rise into the occasion and like, fighting for her survival, beating Mrs. Voorhees with a boat oar, to and actually one of the most effective attacks. She straight up hit her between the legs in one attack and
she
turned the
did.
fight.
She did.
Yeah, it was
And she kept like knocking down, and at one point you think that Mrs. Voorhees is dead because she's bleeding out the back of her head, and she
right.
still gets up and keeps fighting. And uh, this girl fought for her life, and and you feel that in the movie. The acting in this uh, is what I would say is on a much higher level than a lot of '80s horror movies are,
No,
in my
absolutely.
opinion. This movie, especially in the series, has some of the higher end of the acting, I would say.
Right, because at this point, it really is a passion project from Sean S. Cunningham, who had done like he did Piranha in '79, and
Yeah.
I he actually he had his start his career actually started in softcore porn, which was why he didn't shy away from. Which again, though, surprisingly, not hardly any nudity in this film, but he
No,
kind of
there's lots of angle shots,
right,
kind of gratuitous shots, I would call them,
right
but
for
not
sure.
necessarily nudity.
Yeah, and like even though this film kind of kicked off, I think a lot of tropes that eventually the whole franchise became known for, that really didn't get like the overt the a lot of nudity, a lot gore in some of the films. Really got amped up further while kind of the acting quality maybe dropped because they were more like, well, no one really cares if they give a good performance. They just want to see blood, guts, tits, and ass. So sorry, that's one of my favorite phrases in my entire life.
No, it's all good, man. No,
So
it's
with this,
great.
so with this one might actually catch people off guard. I think the first time they'd ever watch it, because especially if you'd seen the sequels like I did first. I watched this whole series very much out of order originally.
Yeah.
So going back to this one, I was really surprised by how it's taken very serious, and because they are trying to compete or at least live up to the quality of what Halloween, and I believe that like the Town That Dreaded Sundown I think came out before it too, like
Yeah.
those kind of films that were they were horror but they were tense and they weren't campy or cheesy yet. So it's
Well,
like, oh
but that's something in this movie that even though it's got the Good Friday the 13th camp, which
mhm.
it does,
Yeah, of
when
course.
they're making fun of the cop and that sort of stuff, it's great, right?
Yeah, right.
And even Crazy Ralph on his bicycle, things like that are kind of campy parts of the series. It does have a level of suspense that actually gives you some fear.
Yeah,
Um,
and I
because some of these movies, slasher movies, tend to just be like you said, blood, guts, tits, and ass, right?
right.
They're not really in it for the scares. They're not in it for. But Friday the 13th, certainly the early movies have that.
Right.
They have the suspense, and a lot of that comes from the first person viewpoint of the killer.
Yeah, and I also think it's the where he wanted the entire cast of teens to be in there and be and like the influence from like movies like Meatballs with the screwy
Right,
teen comedy. I think that's a
right,
great juxtaposition because, like you said, we have the goofball acting like a Native American. That one guy pretended to drown so he could get a kiss. We have a lot of those wacky teenage antics where you kind of like, even though I'm sure they
right.
knew they were going into a horror movie, it kind of lets your guard down. So when the deaths start
That's right.
stacking up, it's that shock to the system, and I think it's super well done in this film. That and I know like I'm sure the movie buffs, of course, hold this movie in high regard, but like I think that kind of skill and like the how well written it actually is kind of overlooked due to most people's thinking of it. It's just another slasher film.
Well, and the score plays a big part of that. The musical score plays a big
Oh,
part of it too, because you get that iconic
oh,
going on, that it plays out throughout the rest of the series. But the score is a big part of that. In also the camera angles they use. Uh,
the camera angles were definitely big, and comment on the score. Like you may not notice it at first, and something even I like every time I rewatch it, I kind of realize it's actually very minimal, and I think that also adds to the tension. Like there's literally like the it's
yeah,
used effectively, and there's a little like some slight piano, but like up until the final like the reveal of who Mrs. Voorhees is, there's very little music actually in the film.
because there's not a lot happening up until that point.
Exactly, like
As far as like the drama of the movie, there's a lot of setup.
right,
Don't get me wrong, and yeah, you've got people dying up to that point. But when it gets to that's where all the suspense in this movie is, in my opinion, is at the end when it's her and Alice left.
Yeah, and
pretty much.
yeah, and you get the music basically when there are kills, and I think that's like super effective because
It
like
is.
nowadays a lot of jump scares come from in these modern films a sudden burst of music, and it's so predictable when you hear it start to build nowadays. But back
Yeah.
then, like it wasn't just a sudden burst of music. It's just suddenly when the danger is near, then it starts building slowly, just like the kill, and then it crescendos when the kill actually happens. And yeah,
Well, and one thing in this movie is that it used suspense for the scares as opposed to jump scares, in
oh
my opinion.
oh no, absolutely. Like there's like a couple jump scares like in there, but it's not over. This is before it became an overused trope in horror films where everything has to
And
make
I
you
don't mind a good jump scare if it's earned it, if the movie's earned it,
if it's earned it.
and
Absolutely.
it has to do that through building up a suspense for it.
Yeah.
Putting my hand in a hole and pretending that somebody grabbed it isn't earning a jump scare from me, you
Right.
know.
Right.
Which we'll get to that movie at some other point in
Oh,
time. But
for sure. But like this one, it used it well with like as we mentioned earlier, like the body jumps out the tree. Basically, like how all the victims were kind of placed at the very end to scare the absolute shit out of Alice.
see, and I
Yeah.
that's the part that made me think Jason was helping the placement of the bodies.
Yeah. No, that's a
It was
very
like
good
he
point.
was corralling the people back into her. She was doing the killing,
Right.
but he kept them corralled in, is the way in my mind it worked.
No, no, I mean, absolutely. Although I still argue just because of the man hand and the force I assume it takes to shove an arrow through somebody,
That
Jason may
kill
have.
very well could
Yeah,
have been
yeah.
him. Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's a great perspective. As many times as big of a fan and how much I look into these movies, it never even occurred to me that he was helping her
It
because you only
in
see
fairness, it
her.
never occurred to me till today.
Hey, and that's the beauty of like kind of reviewing these films like this. And now it's like you learned something, I learned something, or at least I learned a new perspective that I really like.
Or at least some headcanon that I'll take to the grave with me until
I'll
somebody tells me differently.
dude, it's official as far as I'm concerned. Until Sean S. Cunningham says otherwise.
There you go.
But
There
yeah,
you go.
that's a great look at this. Well, I think I mean, we both obviously enjoyed it, right? We both
Yeah.
recommend
Yeah.
this one for sure, which I think is something we should also tell, like because we're gonna, we're here to review, and of course, we're gonna sing the praises, and we're gonna say what we didn't like about the films, of course, and they're not all gonna hold up. So I think it's fair to say that we'll tell y'all if we think you should even bother checking some of these films of any series that we're gonna do out. But and we both.
I thought we'd
Yeah.
give a scream rating also.
Oh, okay, okay,
Like 4 out of 5 screams or something like that.
okay.
Real quick before we get to that, I
Yeah.
wanted to say I did keep a kill count,
Oh, nice, nice.
and there was 9 kills by the killer,
Oh,
which whether it's Mrs. Voorhees or Jason,
right.
and 1 by Alice. So there
Oh,
you go, 10 murder death kills
I'm gonna
in
call
this
the.
movie.
I'm gonna add one to that though, and the only
Okay.
actual death that actually happened on screen, the snake.
Oh yeah. Oh, you are right.
That was a
You
real
are right.
snake.
Well, sorry about that, guys. Seems like we had a little bit of technical difficulties. Maybe we can get that edited out before we go live. If not, yeah, you'll get to hear us ramble a little bit. Uh, I wanted to go ahead and give a scream rating on this. What's yours, Sean? Out of 5 screams, what would you rate this?
Honestly, and I mean, take into account how much I enjoyed the film as well as its importance, I'm gonna give it 4.5 screams.
I am going to give it 4.5 as well. So,
Yeah,
by my advanced math, that is 4.5 screams average between the two of us.
that is correct, sir.
So, another little thing we're going to do on every one of these episodes is one of us is going to give a recommendation of a film that maybe you haven't heard of, or maybe you have, but maybe not as mainstream kind of movie that we think you should check out. And this is one I actually watched this week. And Sean,
Oh,
you'll have to let me know if you've seen it, but this is called Let Me In.
yes.
It came out in 2010. And this is a movie about a bullied young boy that lives next door to a 12-year-old female vampire with her guardian father like figure that actually does the killing and brings home blood for her.
Right.
Uh, Pretty good movie. I really enjoyed it. And
I
I
got
think it would be one for people to check out.
they should absolutely check it out. And I got one extra for you just because you brought that up. It's actually a remake of, I believe, Swedish or Finnish horror movie called Let the Right One In.
That is correct.
And I've watched both versions, and they're both excellent. But I also would recommend you to find the original.
Okay. I will have to find the original and watch it as well. I really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah,
for for young vampires,
right.
the effects and everything in it, and how she overpowered people when she needed to, really good.
Oh yeah, I second that recommendation for sure. But that is going to do it for today. I want to thank all y'all for tuning into this. If you like what you heard, please feel free to give us a thumbs up, give us a comment. Let us know what you think about Friday the 13th, and let us know how did it affect you? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Are we wrong? Are we right? Just hit some on there, and of course share the videos around, pass around, let your friends know that hey, Sean and Craig are doing some pretty cool stuff with horror movies here in the coming weeks. But that's gonna do it for now. So yeah, we're gonna catch y'all later.